You got a new set of 3D printers, but you're not quite sure how to get started. Who is managing all of these 3D prints? What should students make? How many kids should work on a project? We are going to be answering all of those questions and more in today's episode. Welcome to the Elementary STEM Coach Podcast, a show that'll help you with lesson ideas, systems, and actionable tips to apply to your classroom. I am your host, Naomi Meredith, a former classroom teacher turned current STEM teacher and coach. With over a decade of experience teaching and a master's degree in STEM leadership, I am here to coach you throughout the year to help you gain back more time to create innovative experiences for your students. Grab your earbuds and let's get started. If you are listening to this episode about 3D printers and you are about to turn it off because you do not have 3D printers, don't shut off this episode. You can still do 3D print projects without a 3D printer. I am going to explain that, but bear with me. This episode is still for you, whether or not you still have a printer. All of the creating of 3D prints is still exactly the same, whether or not you have 3D printers. And that's going to make sense in a little bit. When I first got my 3D printers when I was a K-5 STEM teacher, they were delivered literally a week before the COVID shut down. I was so excited opening up these 3D printers. I had an older one in my classroom that didn't work. It wouldn't even read current 3D print files. And you would try to put the files on a flash drive. They couldn't even convert to the right file format. The printer was loud. The extruder, the part that the plastic comes out of, wouldn't even work. And it was older and it was good at its time, but it didn't work for me anymore. So I got those 3D printers delivered. They're the MakerBot Sketch Classroom. And I'm not sponsored by MakerBot, but I really love these 3D printers for an elementary space because they was literally take them out of the box and you are ready to go. So I got these 3D printers delivered right before the COVID shutdown and didn't know that was going to be the thing. And so when we were told to go home and we weren't going to come back, I actually brought the 3D printers home with me. And no, I didn't keep them. I brought them back, but I had purchased these 3D printers and didn't have any experience with 3D printing. And I thought, well, this might be a great time to learn. Students can still create a project. I can print it and deliver it, which is something that I did end up doing. And then I also was working with a few of the parents in my school community who were in healthcare, and we were 3D printing some ear savers. So they're pretty cool. It was a print file that was sent to me that where you put it on the back of your head and then your mask loops would loop over the back. And then it would really help for people who are wearing a mask all day. So I learned really quickly how to use these 3D printers and how to use the software during this time because, well, we had time. And I actually created a bunch of video tutorials for the platform that I like to use for students called Tinkercad. And those tutorials are still available up on my YouTube channel. They are still relevant and really helpful. And I'm also going to explain how I actually use those when I teach 3D print lessons. From there, I have printed thousands of prints and have learned the tips and tricks of when it comes to teaching these lessons with students and making sure that the prints are successful. And this is from nobody training me but myself. And I'm all about being efficient and doing things that would work best. So I'm going to talk about in this episode the systems you want to set up for your 3D printing, some behavior management tricks, and some ideas for some lessons. When it comes to the systems for your 3D printing, you want to get started on your 3D print lessons pretty early on, most likely the second semester. And the reason for that is by now the students are used to your classroom and your teaching style and all of that. And also it's going to take you a long time to print. The biggest thing and the biggest headache, I would say, which it's not that bad if you don't have a system, it's horrible. But the biggest thing is managing all the prints and staying on top of it. And I learned that very quickly because I wanted everybody to 3D print. I don't think it should be until the older grades where students are 3D printing. I think they should be designing and developing those skills as soon as kindergarten. And so what I did is while I had the 3D printers at school, so when we actually did this in class, I realized there were a bunch of common questions that students would ask me. They would ask me, what is printing right now? Whose class are you printing? How long is this going to take? When are you going to print my class? So I came up with some posters and a system and process that will not only help answer the students' questions when they're looking at the 3D printers, but also help me stay on track of whose projects were done and all of that. And so I actually have these all for free for you. You can print them out. There are pictures to show you how I use them in my classroom. And I kept my printers out in a space where students could look at the projects printing because it's really important too to nourish that curiosity and have kids get excited about what 3D printing is and how this is another type of printer that we can have to create things in a 3D world. What's really cool too, if you're intimidated about 3D printing, it's really not as hard as you think. And I had it in my head, this misconception that 3D printing is overly complicated. And all it really is, and I took a class in Chicago with a bunch of kids about 3D printing because I wanted to hear other adults teach kids about it. But they said it's just like a hot glue gun extruding that plastic, and it's just going in layers and layers and layers, like icing a cake. And so what it's doing is when you create that file, when you create that 3D image on the computer, the program will slice it. You might have heard of that. It's going to cut it up into layers. So when the printer reads that file, it's reading those layers and going in that pattern. That's all it's doing. It's not that complicated. And if you ever play around with a 3D pen, it's literally a hot glue gun, but it's a pen, and you want to stack the layers on top of each other to make it a 3D shape. So when you create that 3D print station, put it in an area that kids can see so they can understand what is happening. Maybe they get to see their print in action. But I would write down the class names of who it is. I would say whose is printing, what project they are working on. And so that would really help answer those questions. Of course, I would answer them too, but they learned soon enough that I had all that information right there for them. Also, create a space where you can put the finished 3D prints because you're just going to be staying on track of these for a long time. This was actually part of my morning routine for half of the year. Once I got settled in the day, I would line up all my prints for the day. And then throughout class, I would keep track of if it got finished or the students would tell me it was finished, because that is the hardest part about 3D printing is as a teacher, staying on top of it, making sure things are printed, making sure whose print is who, and keeping it organized in your class. Once you have that little 3D print station set up, you want to think about how do you want to save their prints? How are you going to collect their finished projects? The platform that I like to use with second grade through sixth grade is called Tinkercad. It is a free software to use, completely free. And they have improved it over the years where there actually is a teacher component where you can set up a class a lot like Google Classroom and have all of your students' prints in one place. If you do have Google accounts and set it up that way, it's really cool because as students are designing with you over the years, they get to see all of the projects that they have created. You don't have to have Google accounts to get started, but it's a great asset if you do. And it's really easy to see all of their projects. So thinking about how you want to collect those prints, I have my students name the file in a specific way. I have them name their file. So there's a way you can rename it, just like a Google Doc or something like that, where I have students name the file with their first name, last initial, and then a dash or a slash and their teacher's name. Because when you are keeping track of all of these prints, they're all going to kind of start looking the same over time. And so that's going to keep things really organized when you start downloading these print files that you know whose it is. My 3D printers actually would say on the screen the file name, so that was really nice as well. And then in the software that would take the files, so you download them off Tinkercad, you put it in the software that talks to your 3D printer so you don't print it directly from Tinkercad. So don't be worried, oh, they create it, they're going to send it to the printer. It doesn't work like that. Once I had it in the software that talked to my printers, I could even see the names of who printed. So if I forgot, oh, whose print is this? I could go back into that platform and double check. And then if I needed to reprint something, I knew whose it was. In terms of organizing the finished prints, I had little boxes on top of my 3D printers and had Ziploc bags where I would just write the names of the student, had the bag on top of the printer, and when it was finished, I'd put it in the bag, and then I had a big bag for each classroom. So like I said, it's a lot of management for a teacher. My free 3D printing station setup is going to help you a ton. For my younger students, I like to use, it's free on the computer and a paid app on a tablet, but Doodle 3D Transform, where students actually draw their 3D print design. And the cool thing about this app is that when students are drawing on one side in 2D, simultaneously in real time, they see their design in 3D. So it's helping them understand, oh, this image I'm making on the computer is flat, but when it gets printed, it's going to have all of these elements. So it's a really good way to help students understand what is happening. I would typically use this with younger students, kindergarten and first grade, or even students who are older who need more support. This is a great option as well. The designing doesn't take as long. You don't need to create accounts. And so what I would do is when I'm introducing this platform, I would show the students how the platform works. We would make something for fun, try out all the buttons and see how it goes. And then when we got to the designing, whether it was whole group, we did the designing for our project, or if I pulled small groups for this, then I would save their print file, the same system, first name, last initial, teacher name, and then I would airdrop it from the iPads to my computer. Or you could do something similar like email it to yourself just to get it off of that device. If you are a teacher who doesn't even have 3D printers, you don't even need to set up the 3D print station or set up those systems and processes. But you can actually still do all of the lessons. You would do everything exactly the same, and you would teach it as if you did have 3D printers. Maybe their print won't get designed. Maybe they have access to a 3D printer or the public library, or maybe you know you're going to get a 3D printer later on, or maybe your district has one to borrow. I had that situation before I got my new ones. And so you can still teach these lessons exactly the same. You don't have to have 3D printers to teach a 3D print lesson. And so if you feel like you're missing out, oh, we just can't do this, you still can. Everything's going to stay the same. They just aren't going to see what it looks like printed out. And that's it. And that's all on you and the teacher anyway. I know some teachers, maybe in middle school, might have students manage this process. But to be honest, I was in my classroom all day and the students would rotate every week. It was just easier if I did it and stayed on top of it. In terms of behavior management with your 3D printing, it might not get as crazy as a makerspace lesson might be. I usually have students work by themselves or in a group of 2. I don't do bigger than that. And if they are in a group of 2, I have them collaborate on the same computer. I do know in Tinkercad, you can actually share a file and collaborate on the same file at the same time, like a Google Doc. But I prefer that they actually are looking on the same screen so that they are interacting and talking about their project if they choose to work together. For 3D printing, I actually didn't mind students creating on their own. Yes, I know that means that there's a lot more prints to print, but I wanted all of my students to have the experience of designing. It's a little bit with Makerspace because you can pass the objects around. Someone might be gathering materials. Someone might be doing some research. So it just is different with the material sense. But with 3D printing, I wanted students to figure out, okay, here's how you zoom in and out. Here's how you add new pieces. And especially since I had students 3D printing from kindergarten, I wanted them to grow in their skills year after year. So that's why I didn't mind them designing on their own, but they would collaborate and talk to each other and help each other out because they were using the same platform. Also, sometimes I had students who actually collaborated in the planning process of what their project was, and they were creating the same exact thing on their own devices, but they were talking to each other. So they had the same invention, but they created it on their own so they could both learn the platform, which is actually a really cool and awesome idea. The lessons in teaching 3D printing might be a little bit tricky. And so I would start my first day of building that background knowledge and gathering information and planning their designs a lot like you would with a makerspace lesson. The next day, I would have students finish up those plans. And then the last 10 minutes, we would set up their accounts in Tinkercad for second through fifth grade. This would take a little bit of a while because they had to click through some options, add in the teacher code, which also is a really important skill with technology, is reading the prompts. What is the computer asking me? Can we follow directions in order? And so we would get them all connected. And then the last little bit, I would show them some things about the platform and how it works, like an overview. Now, thinking about your position, you probably teach a lot of classes in the day, and that can get really tiring on you teaching those same basics over and over and over again. And so I recommend screen recording yourself and playing your video of you showing those things. That's what I did. I already have the videos. You can show mine. That's fine. We will embed the playlist for you in the show notes. But it was so funny. I would show these videos. It's me talking. It's the whole thing. I'm showing them exactly what I would show them in person, just because I knew I was going to show this to 5 classes, 4 classes for a month. It's the same thing over and over again, and I wouldn't miss anything. And they were absolutely quiet and they're super engaged. So a nice little hack. It's still me teaching. I'm just making sure I don't miss anything. Then the days 3 through 5. So I had students 5 days in a row. They had the time to work on their projects, but in the beginning, we would still do a little bit of background knowledge. So building upon why we're doing the project. And then also I'd show them another tutorial video. I did not expect my students to know everything about the 3D print platform, and they might still not know even at the end of the week. They might have figured out the things that I'm showing in the video before I even show it. And that's fine. I couldn't teach them everything in one day. So instead of, and this is a growth mindset thing too, instead of the kids coming up to me and whining, I don't know how to do blah, 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 or I don't know how to stack a shape. I'm like, oh, well, this is a great opportunity to click around and try something. That will be our lesson tomorrow, but maybe you can figure it out before tomorrow. And some kids might even hear the conversation across the room and say, I already know how to do that. Let me show you. And so I would teach that mini lesson just like you would as a classroom teacher. Some kids might know some of the things before you teach it, but it's okay for them to hear it in a different way. Throughout the week, I would show them or teach them little segments that would help their design. So by Friday, they were good to go and knew some basics about the platform. Before they could be finished, I did have students physically check with me their actual design. They could not be done with their design until we physically talked about it together. Now, you might say, oh my gosh, this is so exhausting. Why would you even do that? Well, if you don't do that, first of all, if they need to make changes, they're not going to understand why they need to make changes if you just go and do it by yourself. And so it's a good learning experience where, hey, you need to do this in your project so it will print. And in all of my 3D print lessons in my TPT shop, I actually have a checklist of what students have to do in their design to make sure, yes, you follow the project rules, but also, are you actually completing your project in a way it's actually going to print? Because there are things in 3D printers you have to do in order for it to print or it's not going to work. And so I would talk with every single kid one-on-one. I would go to their computer. We would talk about their design. I would scroll through. I actually took a wireless mouse with me with the USB port. I would plug it into their computer. I would scroll around on their computer, check out their design, look at it, make sure they followed the directions. And then if they were good to go, great. They could close out and be done, or oops, you need to go fix this. Now, some of you also might be thinking, this is a thing with 3D printing. Do I ever reprint prints? And it depends. If there was a student who I know was working and trying their best in class, and there might be something in their design that didn't go as planned, the next time I see them, or I might even catch them in their classroom, I might let them know, hey, this part of your 3D design didn't work. Can you fix this? And I will reprint this for you. And I would just keep track of who it was and what class they're in, and then I would reprint it because I was printing for months. So it was no big deal. Still, sometimes, and and you've seen this, you have some kids who are off task. They create something in their 3D print, and you've talked to them about it. They still use all of the random shape. It has nothing to do what you're working on. I might not even print it. And that really is a learning experience. We've talked about it. I had gave you a chance to fix it, and you still didn't follow directions. So when it comes to the day that I am passing out those 3D prints and they don't have something, that's their own fault. And that might sound a little bit harsh, but you can only do what you can do. And a few kids don't follow directions. It is what it is. You've tried. Like, this is a two-way street. And so they will learn, oh, well, next time if I want something printed, I better try. So that can definitely happen. Just kind of gauge the experience. For the most part, kids would know if they don't do what they're supposed to do, I'm not going to print it. They learn that pretty fast about me. I am a strict, nice kind of teacher. I will give you lots of chances, but also you got to do the work. And if you don't, that's your problem. So, but for the most part, everything worked out. Here and there, you also might have students who are absent. I'm all, hey, sorry, hopefully you're here next year. We're not going to do this project. We have to move on. And that's how it goes. Now, when it comes to lesson ideas, also a systems thing, a couple of questions. I would even have kids ask me this, or I've seen this in classrooms, which I don't understand, is would I print random designs? Oh, I found this really cool 3D print. Can you print it for me? No, I would not. I am not a free source 3D printer. I'm not going to go print random things you found on the internet just because you want a little plastic toy. I would say that is not my philosophy of a 3D printer. We are going to design what we print. This is another way of creating something just like you would in a makerspace project. We are creating our prototype through printing it. And so, no, I am not printing out random things that I find on the internet. So along with that, what could kids print whatever they wanted? No. That's why I would physically check with what they have. And honestly, this was always a question for kids who were new in the building. Other kids are like, no, she's not going to do that. But our lessons were so purposeful that the kids were really excited about what they were creating. And all of the lessons were tied to standards and building to solve a problem. So I do have some lessons when it comes to 3D printing to help you get started. I do have an episode more about 3D printing, a few that I'll link in the show notes, and also all of the 3D printing lessons. There is a free playlist that you can grab. But in terms of the lessons, they're all connected to standards that are appropriate for their grade levels and help solving those issues and problems. So in kindergarten, they create a keychain to help take care of the earth. First grade, we talk about animal traits, their babies and their adults, how they are similar and different. In second grade, they create a custom birdhouse, and this helps them learn the shapes in Tinkercad and how it works. In third grade, we talk about life cycles, and they have to create a model of the life cycle of a living thing. In fourth grade, they create a hollow design. It is empty on the inside, and they create a nightlight that actually will sit on top of a lit up circuit that they make outside of 3D printing. And in fifth grade, they have to create an invention that will help protect Earth's resources. If you're looking for a shorter challenge or something you're like, oh, I don't have as much time, the Birdhouse Challenge is a really good one to get started. It is the quickest project because it doesn't take as much detail because it is more of a starter project. So if you're a little bit short on time, definitely check that one out. As a recap, we talked about the ways in 3D printing to set up your systems, how to manage behavior during this time, and then also some lesson ideas. Don't forget, everything is linked for you in the show notes, and you can also get a free podcast playlist where I have all of the 3D printing lessons organized and all of the episodes in my podcast organized in topics. So if you want to learn more about specific things, that is completely free for you. It's the same exact show you're hearing here, but organized into those categories. So to help target what you need. You can find that in the show notes, or you can head on over to naomimeredith.com/podcast playlist. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode of the Elementary STEM Coach Podcast. I would love to connect with you over on Instagram at @NaomiMeredith_ or send me an email to elementarystemcoachpodcast@gmail.com. Also, make sure to check out my website, naomimeredith.com, to see all the show notes from today's episode and shop my K-5 STEM resources. Any questions you have, needs for resources, or ideas for episodes, get in touch. I'll talk to you soon.